So, sucks to suck.
Yeah. I think you just made up that expression. That's not a thing.
Welcome to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a nerd culture podcast that discusses nerddom through various segments. You can visit us at our website, thenerdspodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at thenerdspodcast, facebook.com/thenerdspodcast, and of course our weird email address, thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. I'm Tyler Hunt, and I am here with my co-host, as always, Pat Attack. How's it going, dude?
Every time. I mean, you've been doing it for what? Like a month and a half now.
Yeah.
And every single time you do it, I'm just like, God damn it.
Well, you embraced it last time, so now it's a thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing, and I immediately regretted it.
I'm going to get us shirts for Indie PopCon, which is coming up in a few weeks. It's going to be just our normal shirt, but on the back of yours, it's going to say Pat Attack.
I will not wear that shirt.
All right. Thanks for being upfront. I won't spend the money then. But yeah, speaking of Indie PopCon, that is coming up very soon.
Yeah, I wish I had known you were going to pimp it, or I would have remembered to write down our booth number. I think it's like 1140, but that's not right. There's no way.
If anybody who's listening is coming to Indie PopCon, yeah, like you'll find us. Like we're in the same place we are every year. So I know we probably have some listeners that found us through Indie PopCon, right? You would think so?
Yeah, I'd hope so.
We've found a bunch of shit out at the PopCon for the last, 4 years? So yeah, it's always a good time.
Yeah, we'll be the ones chanting podcasts.
Yeah, we'll be the ones that are being way too aggressive to get people to our booth. So
you have to be aggressive there. Like, that's one thing that we've learned in like the 4 years that we have gone. Or is this the fourth year that we've gone?
I think this is the fifth year.
Wow, that's crazy.
It is.
But when you're one of the like 5 podcasts that are still there at Indie PopCon, you have to be super aggressive with people.
Well, I mean, speaking from experience, like, I'm a nerdy introvert. So most of the people at these cons are nerdy introverts, and like they want to walk past you and not make eye contact because they don't want the goods you're peddling. So you just have to aggressively pull them over to give them a business card or a sticker or whatever.
It makes me uncomfortable how aggressive you are, though.
Well, in all fairness, I just started being aggressive last year because, I mean, you can attest to this. Like any year where we just sit there and nobody comes up to us, I get very close to committing suicide. So
that first year, the first like hour on Friday, I was like, so this is how Tyler dies. He's going to go back to the hotel room and kill himself.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where my headspace goes. So I was just like, we spent all this money and nobody likes us and this is bullshit. And then, then you start being aggressive and fun and people want to come talk to you. So we'll see if I can work up the oomph to do that again this year.
Yeah, I'm not sure the cosplayers across from us really wanted to talk to us, though.
We always get put across from the cosplayers, too. It's kind of a weird setup.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The podcast alley or internet alley or whatever they want to call it, it keeps shrinking and shrinking, and it's just becoming more of cosplayers, which is fine, but it's kind of a bummer. Yeah,
I don't know. PopCon took on a life of its own that year that they had Markiplier there, and now it's definitely more so like Let's Play stars and YouTube stars and that kind of stuff, which even though, Pat, you do that for the YouTube channel, that's not really our thing necessarily, or at least not my thing. So it's been kind of weird, but they're always so nice there. Like it's something I'm sure we'll keep doing for a while.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm actually really excited about PopCon this year. It seems like there's more people for us, like stuff that we would be interested in. Like Mantis is there. Bran Stark is there, even though he's my least favorite character from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, Hodor's back. He was there the first year, too. We were, like, really close to him that year.
Yeah.
Will Wheaton's going to be there, too. And my interest was kind of piqued about him being there. But I don't know what I would have him sign or that I would even want something signed by him. I guess it's just a nerd. Like, he's king of the nerds in a way. So it's cool that he'll be there.
Yeah, it just seems very weird because he has that reputation of being the super nerdy guy and everybody loves him, but yet he's not really ever been in anything that I like.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't a huge Star Trek fan, so the The Next Generation, really, I didn't watch any of that, so I don't really have any connection to that, obviously. And then, of course, most recently, he's kind of known for just being Wil Wheaton. Like, he's in The Big Bang Theory, which I hate that show so much.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. The thing that I know him for is just being Wil Wheaton. And he also did the audiobook for Ready Player One, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So I know him from that, obviously. I know him as Wil Wheaton. And then he has a YouTube channel called Tabletop or something where I've watched some of his tabletop videos to kind of learn how to play a few board games. So that's pretty cool too. But again, I don't know what I would say to the guy to, go up and take a selfie with him or whatever. Like, that's not really up my alley, but I guess it's cool that he'll be there.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm definitely excited. I really hope that Bran does not pull out, because then I would just have a really shitty Bran Stark pop that I don't really want.
Well, that already happened with me a couple years with Nebula. Karen Gillian was supposed to be there, and I bought a Nebula pop, and I think I ended up giving it away at that con because she pulled out. So I did the same thing with Mantis, and even though Mantis is a character I like and I love Guardians of the Galaxy, and I wouldn't mind having that pop, the whole point of buying it is for her to sign it. So you're definitely hoping that Palm, whatever her Clayton Toff or whatever her last name is, doesn't pull out.
Yeah, there's no way that's right.
Because I'm really looking forward to meeting her. So,
all right, man. So let's just jump right into the episode. We start off each episode by kind of just checking in with each other. We call it what we're into. So what are you into this week?
I am into Silicon Valley Season 5, which just wrapped up last Sunday. I can't remember. We were talking about it last week, and I can't remember if we were talking about it on or off air, but I kind of wanted to hold off on talking about this show until it was over so I could talk about Season 5 collectively. And I don't remember if the seasons of Silicon Valley have always been this short, but this and Barry both were only 8 episodes. So it ended pretty quick. I thought that it used to be 10, but I could be wrong. But anyways, like leading up to season 5 of Silicon Valley, I mean, this is a show that I've talked about each season that it's been on the air on the podcast. But leading up to this season, I was a little worried because this was going to be a toss-up because it was the first season that TJ Miller wasn't going to be a part of the cast. I think I probably mentioned it last year, but he ended up leaving the show. Obviously, I, like everyone else, is kind of soured on TJ Miller a little bit in the last half year. But when he left the show after season 4, there was a lot of questions because, he had some of the best comedic moments throughout the first 4 years of the show. Again, it probably helps the show's cause that, after he left, he was kind of outed as being a piece of shit. So, if he was going to be missed, he kind of sealed his own fate. So that it wouldn't happen when the show came back on the air that anybody would be even talking about his character not being there. So, I guess good on him for, again, being a piece of shit. But with that being said, the show doesn't skip a beat and it still manages to be hilarious and interesting in its 5th year, which is pretty great because 5 years of a show like this, it could get stale. But, it actually almost feels like the show's finding its stride even more at this point, which is impressive since it's always been a pretty good show. My issue with Silicon Valley, though, has always been that each season is kind of predictable and each season follows the same beats, and the end of the season always results in Pied Piper getting out of whatever jam they've gotten themselves into, and they continue to grow the business. And while this season definitely repeats some of those usual beats, like I mentioned, it does feel fresh in comparison to those earlier episodes. And I think that that's probably due to the writers focusing on smaller arcs that are actually part of the bigger overall season arc, as well as just raising the stakes because Pied Piper is just about ready to be in business. They're dealing with millions of dollars. They're dealing with investors. So all of what these first 4 seasons have led up to are beginning to come into fruition, and it's giving them a lot of stories to tell, which are really funny and really compelling. Story aside, it also helps that the show is funnier than ever, especially like I mentioned with Bachman not being a part of it. A lot of the characters I think took a back seat to TJ Miller because he's such an over the top character and such an over the top actor. But I think they all have an opportunity to shine a bit more and then do a bit more now that he's not on the show. So an example would be the character of Jared. I don't remember the actor's name, but he was the one that was on The Office, the tall, skinny guy. He's always had great moments, but he he in particular really shines on this season, and he's come a long way from a comedic standpoint. He's actually probably my favorite character on the show, which says a lot because he's always kind of been a filler character. So, everybody continues to knock it out of the park. Camille's still amazing. Martin Starr is great. I forget, the guy's name who plays, oh my God, I even forgot his character.
Thomas Middle.
Yeah, Middlevich. Thomas Middlevich. He's still great. And it helps because obviously in their 5th year, they're all very comfortable with their characters and they're very comfortable in their roles, but it creates a more compelling TV show whenever they're able to tell these stories with characters they've been playing for 5 years. So, I think Silicon Valley kind of slips through the cracks sometimes. It doesn't get a word buzz and it lives in the shadow of Game of Thrones and Westworld and even this season to a certain extent Barry because it's gotten a lot of praise in its initial season. But I think that it's a show that I look forward to the most every week. And I know that it's not that people don't watch it. Obviously, it's in its 5th year for a reason, but it's a show that I think is a little bit underrated and that I love, obviously.
Yeah, so I recently, speaking of Barry, just finished watching the first season of Barry the other day, and so I was kind of looking for something new. I started to rewatch Stranger Things again, and I was like, no, I can't do this again. Like, I need to watch something that I haven't seen. There's so much out there that I need to watch. So, yeah, so I got a few episodes into Stranger Things again, and I was like, no, you can't do this again. And so I was looking for something else, and I was like, oh, I think I'd watched the first 2 seasons of this show. I was like, okay, well, I can just pick up where I left off, and then I just got kind of sidetracked with Westworld, and I didn't end up watching it. And I think most of that has to do with a lot of the same story beats that you mentioned, like the fact that they're still in season 5 and it's not a real business yet is kind of tells you how slow moving the plot is in most of these seasons. And I mean, it's sitcoms in generally do that. It's like, oh, well, we're going to put you in a problem. And then by the end of the episode, by the end of the season, you're going to be back where you're at. Like, I mean, you're never really, not necessarily, this is a comedy, so you're never going to be in danger. But like the plot itself is never really in danger of shaking it up too much because by the end of the season, it's going to be basically right where they left off. But the fact that it's still not a business is, just kind of shows you how slow moving it is.
Yeah. And I would also definitely agree with that and say that at a certain point, just watching them battle with Hooli gets a little bit old because it's what they've been doing every year. So hopefully season 6 can kind of freshen things up a little bit. They're going to have more to work with. I don't want to give away the plot of how season 5 ends, but it definitely has set season 6 up to be pretty huge. So hopefully we kind of get away from Gavin Belsing and those characters, and we can see Pied Piper really start to flourish. But I don't know which way the writers will go, so we'll see next year.
Yeah, for sure.
So what are you into, man?
All right, so I mentioned Barry. I'm not going to talk about that because Tyler's already brought that up, and it was only 8 episodes, and maybe I'll talk about it next week. I don't know. But the show that I watched before that, and it only took me a couple of days to get through it, is a 4-part docu-series called Evil Genius. Is on Netflix. I've been really into documentaries, as you guys know, in the last couple of years. I've been watching more and more, and my wife and I have been really getting into true crime documentaries, and this was kind of the next one on our list. And I didn't know this going into it, but I kind of have, I don't want to say a vested interest in this documentary, but it was a little bit more intriguing to me once I started watching it because the case, let's go ahead. I'll go ahead and explain the case first and then talk about my interest in it. So it's basically about this guy named Brian Wells, who is a pizza delivery guy who's kidnapped by this group. And essentially they put what looks like a giant handcuff that has a bomb strapped to it. They put it around his neck and force him to rob a bank. And then the plan was that he was going to dump the money, and then he was supposed to go on a scavenger hunt to find the keys to unlock this handcuff. Well, he didn't make it out of the he made it out of the bank, but then the cops arrested him, and then of course they're questioning him, and he has the bomb, so they're kind of staying away, and he's like, hey, you got to help me because this is going to go off. And I guess this is a big spoiler, but I mean, you see it in the first 15 minutes of the first episode, the bomb does go off. That's the whole case. And that obviously is a catalyst for this entire, I think it was like 4 or 5 year investigation. And it's a pretty crazy case. But the reason I was even more interested than I think normal people would be interested in this case is the fact that it happens in Erie, Pennsylvania. And if you're not aware, I had a lot of family that was from Erie. My dad actually was born and raised in Erie. My mom went to Mercyhurst College, which is in Erie. That's how my parents met. My sister also went to Mercyhurst years later, obviously. She actually went a year, or I think maybe even a semester after this happened. So, I mean, I think it happened in '03. So it would have been like the semester right before that she went. So it's pretty crazy. Like at one point they talk about this bank. I'd never been to that particular bank, but the conspirators, the ones that strapped this bomb to his neck, actually were watching him rob the bank from a restaurant parking lot. And I've ate at that restaurant like a million times, like visiting family. So yeah, I was definitely more interested in this documentary than I think most people would be, but it's such a crazy case that I would definitely recommend watching it, because I think they even say this a couple of times in the documentary. There's so many twists and turns. Like literally, if this was a Hollywood movie and they wrote it exactly like the case, people would just assume that they were being ridiculous because there's so many crazy things. And I believe that the kind of shitty Jesse Eisenberg 30 Minutes or Less comedy is actually based on this case. I know the Brian Wells' family were pretty upset with that movie when it first came out. So yeah, it's kind of, even 30 Minutes or Less isn't as crazy as this case. Cause I think for that very reason, like, I don't think that people would believe that it was actually real. Cause it's insane, some of the lengths that these people go, and they're in prison, spoiler alert, I guess, but nobody has ever even been charged with his murder. And I'm not going to give away why that happened, but they basically were able to weasel their way out of that. So it's a very, very interesting case. And if you're interested in true crime documentaries at all, I definitely suggest it. It's only 4 parts. I think the parts are like between like 45 minutes and like an hour. So it's a really quick watch. I think we knocked it out in like an afternoon.
Yeah, this sounds super interesting. I mean, you definitely gave away some points of the case, but like I'm still definitely intrigued. So I might have to watch this. I do remember the movie 30 Minutes or Less. I will say I haven't thought about that movie in probably a decade, but that's crazy that the real case is even more absurd than that silly movie. So yeah, you've definitely piqued my interest for sure.
Yeah, it's, I actually own that movie. I think we went and saw it together when it came out, and I was really excited for it because it looked really funny. And then it's just not that funny. And then I think I bought it for like $1 at a Black Friday sale or something like that. And I was like, well, I'll give it another shot. And then I rewatched it. I was like, it's just as bad.
Yeah, it's Jesse Eisenberg, Aziz Ansari, Danny McBride, and there's one other person in there, right? Like who plays like one of the bad guys.
I don't remember. I just remember Danny McBride. Like that's the, I mean, he's the, I guess the mastermind behind all of it. But I mean, yeah, I want to say there was somebody like a side character that was kind of his lackey that I cannot remember what that guy, I can see his face.
It wasn't Nick Swardson, was it?
Yes, I think it might have been. Yeah.
That's
actually
embarrassing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to look it up on IMDb, but unfortunately I don't have service. So we'll just leave that one linked.
And I don't share my Wi-Fi password. We didn't mention in the intro that you're sitting right next to me.
Oh yeah, that's unusual for us to be together if you guys are keeping track at home. So, yeah, it is Nick Swardson. Well, that explains it.
Yeah.
All right. It has a 6.1 on IMDb, which isn't really that bad for IMDb. So.
Yeah, but IMDb users are stupid.
That is true. I'm one of them, and I'm pretty stupid. So. All right, you ready to head into comics?
Yeah. What'd you read this week?
So, like Pat said, I'm here in the flesh with him this week. So I'm in Evansville, away from home, which is now northern Ohio, which is actually kind of close to Erie, Pennsylvania. Weirdly enough. But since I'm here, I just kind of had to find something to read. Pat can attest to this. I texted him yesterday and told him dibs on Black Panther #1, but it turns out I was a week ahead on Midtown Comics, and that comes out next week. So I had to kind of hurry and find a different comic that I could read this week for the podcast, which is a little bit behind the scenes and definitely makes it sound like I just read a comic this week for the podcast, which is absolutely true. But long story short, I ended up reading a comic put out by Image this week called Flavor, and it is obviously a #1. So Flavor #1, which sounds like a Guy Fieri comic, but it is not. So this comic is written by Joseph Keating. Wook Jin Clark is the artist, and I mean that's kind of the issue that I've started with, always pointing out the writer and the artist, is that whenever they have crazy names, I know I'm not pronouncing it right, but that's who put this comic together. And overall, I would say this is a very good first issue for a comic. It doesn't just offer a bunch of exposition to say what's going on. It lets the reader find out what's going on through the artwork and through the very tuned in dialogue that the writer uses, and it gets your buy-in of the main character by creating sympathy for her and her family. The main character's name is XOO, and I don't know how you would pronounce that. XO. So
Hugs and kisses?
Yeah, so we'll just call her Hugs and Kisses. But yeah, she's the main character, and like I said, it creates a lot of sympathy for her and her family, which is very important to an initial issue to get your buy-in. However, while it does almost everything the correct way that you would want a #1 to go, the problem I have with this comic is that it is not an interesting concept to me at all, so I will not be continuing to read it. Like I mentioned, the book follows Hugs and Kisses, who is an unlicensed chef struggling to keep her parents' restaurant open while they're down on their luck. Both her mom and her dad they're sick and they're confined to wheelchairs, so it's up to Hugs and Kisses to keep things running. I'm really starting to get in my head about this Hugs and Kisses thing. But obviously with her being underage and kind of being an unlicensed chef, the state kind of takes issue with the situation and sends Hugs and Kisses' uncle, Jeff, to take care of her since she hasn't been going to school and fulfilling all of her responsibilities as a teenager. And I did forget to mention that Hugs and Kisses also has a dog friend that she speaks with and can interpret, kind of like Han Solo and Chewbacca. All we see are barks, but she has full-on conversations with this dog. And the dog also reads and wears glasses. And at one point, Hugs and Kisses dresses the dog up like an adult, and they do like the crazy, silly thing where the dog is on her shoulders and like she's acting like she's an adult. It's kind of crazy, and you can probably see why it's not up my alley. It seems like it might be for a younger demographic, but I also haven't mentioned yet that this comic has a culinary consultant. The culinary consultant's name is Ali Buzari. She's very prominently featured on the cover and in like the credits of the comic. And I don't know what she did in this first issue. Maybe it comes alive in future issues, but the only thing that resembles any type of culinary art is in this issue, Hugs and Kisses is trying to get some rare truffles at one point. But besides that, there's like no cooking. So I don't know what this culinary consultant is doing. I don't know how much this culinary consultant is making off of this book, but it's pretty silly. So, I mean, you can probably tell as I've recapped this issue that I think that it's meant for a different demographic from myself. It does almost everything a first issue should do, but I need better content to stay with the book, and that's not in this comic for sure.
Yeah, it sounds pretty stupid. I'm not going to read this.
do not.
All right, so we've kind of talked about this a little bit in the past, not a little bit. We bring it up like every other episode that we've been kind of trying to cut out some books here and there, and I've kind of gotten to the point where I read a lot of new books, but I generally don't try to have like a bunch of #1s in my collection. So I've been trying to do, if I give a book a shot, I'm going to do it on Comixology, because if it doesn't work out, then I just have it on my Comixology. Like, that doesn't matter to me at all. So I downloaded 2 books this week on Comixology. One of them is Lucy Dreaming #3, which is a book that I've talked about before, and I read #3 and it just wasn't all that interesting. I think eventually it's going to be an important issue in the overall arc of the comic, because it feels kind of like not necessarily a filler, but kind of like a glue episode. Like I think issue 4, I keep saying episode, issue 4 is going to be pretty important. The third issue kind of has to lead you into that, and it just wasn't very interesting. So I was like, well, I can't really talk about that because there's not a whole lot to talk about. And so I was like, oh, well, I'll just read the other one that I downloaded. And that is a book called A Walk Through Hell, which I kind of had that same feeling that you did when I decided to start like talking about who wrote it and who drew it, because I wrote down their names. Well, I know the writer because he's a famous comic book writer. Garth Ennis wrote this book. Is the reason why I downloaded it, to be honest with you. It was number 1 and he wrote it, and that was pretty much all I needed to know. But who drew it, and there's absolutely no way that I'm going to pronounce his or her first name or last name correctly. Goran Suzoka? Nope.
That's made up.
Nope. There's no way. But anyways, this book was put out by Aftershock Comics, which is obviously an indie publisher. Literally never heard of them before that. I know that Garth Ennis was doing a lot for Aviator, which is another indie publisher, so I'm not sure why the jump to Aftershock or what happened there. But this book is not good. Like, it's really super dialogue heavy. It tries to do that thing that I talked about, I think it was last episode, where it starts off strong. Like, it has like this big moment, but it just wasn't big enough for me. Like, it didn't capture my attention. And then it goes straight into a lot of dialogue and just like 2 characters just talking back and forth. They're 2 cops. I think they're actually 2 FBI agents. Not that it fucking matters, but they're basically just talking about the case. And then there's like some Twitter stuff about like gun control. It's very, very weird. And then they essentially get called in to go into this warehouse, and this SWAT team has already gone into the warehouse. And there's like this mystery, like what happened while they were in there. They're only in there for a couple of minutes, and then all of a sudden they come out and they're like freaked out. And so the FBI agents go into this warehouse, and I literally just explained to you the entire first issue. Nothing else happens. Literally, it's all like just fluff and just like introducing you to the comic. Like, I'm hoping that, well, I don't give a shit because I'm not going to read the second issue, but I'm hoping that they give something in the second issue for people that continue with this book, because there's almost nothing that happens in this book.
It's funny because it sounds like my number 1 did a better job of being a number 1 than yours, but yours has better content than my number 1. At any point, does a dog dress up like a human adult in this book?
No.
See, so it's already beating mine. But yeah, I mean, you don't want your first number 1 to completely bore you to death or to overload the reader. So that's surprising, especially given it was written by Garth Ennis.
Yeah, I really enjoy his stuff. Like, I think it was one of like the first maybe 15 episodes we did of this podcast. I talked about kind of an alien ripoff book that he was doing called Caliban. That was really, really cool. I liked that book quite a lot. Of course, he's done some work with Punisher. He was the one that created Preacher, Crossed. Like, he's done some really cool stuff in the past. So, yeah, I'm surprised that this book wasn't better.
Yeah, it's a bummer for sure. Like, I would have been looking forward to that. So, sucks to suck.
Yeah. I think you just made up that expression. That's not a thing.
Yeah, I don't think that's an expression either, but it's obviously going to be the name of this episode. So, yeah, sucks to sucks. Nope.
You didn't even say it right the second time.
Well, yeah. All right.
I was kind of hoping at this episode, as soon as I said it, that this episode would be titled Hugs and Kisses. I feel like that's the title right there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one too. So, is the Nerds podcast, are we more so sucks to suck, or are we more so hugs and kisses? So we'll see. We'll see when you'll know whenever you're listening to this episode, whatever we went with. I think that you convinced me though. I think it's probably going to be hugs and kisses.
Yeah, as soon as I said it, I was like, that's it. If it was my week, I would have been writing that down on my phone to make sure that I didn't forget that.
I almost, no, I mean, that was played off of me. I almost think that you go into it with like, if I slip this saying into this episode, like it's going to be the title. Like, have you done that before?
No, I mean, I've written jokes before. When we first started out, I wrote like everything down. Now I write almost nothing down. But yeah, when we first started the podcast, I pretty much took notes on almost everything that I was going to say. So sometimes I would write jokes, but no, I never went in with a title in mind.
Well, I have not either, but I think that if you go back and you listen to our original episodes, you could probably tell that we overproduced a little bit. So
For sure.
So don't do that. But yeah, you ready for nerd news?
What do you got this week?
Some bullshit. There was not much. So the first is just a show that we don't watch, but I feel like we should bring it up. It's Gotham has been renewed for a 5th and final season. So good news is that show is going away. The bad news is, like, I mean, you're never going to see Batman. Like, I was hoping like it would be last episode, Bruce Wayne becomes Batman, but he's still like 16 years old. So unless I do like a time thing, it's not going to happen. So this show's kind of just petered off into something no one cares about.
Is there anybody even watching this show anymore? Like, I see articles online about it, and I'm just like, who gives a shit? Like, I had forgotten this was even a show.
It's so bad. Like, you have people like us that love Batman and love the culture of Batman, but we won't watch it because it's awful. So I would imagine that they don't get a lot of ratings, especially since the season 5 was not guaranteed. And I think it's actually got a short season 5 where they're just going to kind of wrap up the show. But, yeah, I mean, I can't imagine they get great ratings.
No, because I think if I remember, like you said, it was kind of on the chopping block. Like, from what I understood, like, when they were canceling all of these shows, this was a show that they were like, okay, this is on the bubble. Like, it might get canceled.
Yeah, I mean, they've done some really stupid things with the characters and the mythology of Batman, so it doesn't surprise me. I was reading an article the other day. Obviously, Cameron Monaghan's Joker-like character has been a big part of that show, and I don't know if you've followed any of it. Obviously, neither of us watch it, but comicbook.com posts articles about it all the time, so every once in a while I'll read it, and like his character, who was originally like a Joker, died, but he had a twin brother who got gassed, so now he's kind of like the Joker, but they aren't allowed to use the word Joker because they want to save that for the movies, and he's not allowed to have green hair because that would be too Joker-esque. And the fact that you even put labels on it like that, or you put rules on it like that, tells me that you don't care about this show. And not to mention, like, the Joker doesn't come around until Batman's around, so they fucked everything. So I don't feel sorry for the show.
No, not at all.
Cool. So next story, I guess, is that a Lando Calrissian standalone Star Wars movie is on the table. I guess depending on how Solo goes next weekend when it comes out, but that is a title they've been bouncing around that they might want to do with Donald Glover. So obviously, I think you and I will probably have more of an opinion on that after next week. But I will say that I've never found the character of Lando to be all that interesting. You know, he kind of has one main point in Empire Strikes Back, and that's to fuck over Han Solo and the rebels. And then in the Return of the Jedi, he kind of redeems himself a little bit, but it feels a little shoehorned. So I've never been a huge fan of the character, so I don't know like what his backstory would be. But I think that if you get a good writer, you could definitely tell some cool stories with the character, especially if Donald Glover is playing him.
Yeah, I'm excited for the fact that Donald Glover looks like he might be the best part of that movie, and obviously we won't know until next week if that's true, but from what I understand from the initial like Twitter reactions and whatever, I don't know how much stake you can put into that, but he seems like he might be the best part of that movie, so I'm excited in that sense. But I always kind of thought of Lando as one of those characters, kind of like what you said, was that he's put in this movie and then people liked him, and so they kind of put him more in the spotlight in Return of the Jedi. So yeah, I don't know. I think that it was just kind of lucky thing that they wrote this character, didn't think he was going to become much, and he became a lot bigger than he originally was intended to.
Yeah, I didn't write this down as a story because it's all speculation. Well, I guess that is too, but apparently they might start filming an Obi-Wan spinoff next year, And I read like what the plot would potentially be about. And obviously it like, you know, the biggest unexplored part of his life is between episodes 3 and 4. So it's going to deal with him on Tatooine. But what I thought was interesting is it felt like it was going to deal with the conflict between him and the Sand People. And I don't know how obviously you would have to add filler to that movie, but you know, the Sand People don't talk. They just growl and roar, right? So how do you even tell a movie about that? So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see if that's true.
Yeah, what I think is kind of funny about that is, and we've talked about this before with the Star Wars comic, a big part of that, at least for the first couple of arcs, where they would kind of go off on these little tangents with the Obi-Wan journals, and it would talk about his time during that period, and that's canon. So are you just going to do like a rehash of that? Or are they just going to kind of start over, or just assume that not a ton of people read that book? I don't know.
I think when push comes to shove, they're going to do whatever they want to do for the movies, and they are not going to care what they say is canon and not canon.
Yeah, that's probably right.
So who knows? I mean, but there's like 20, 25 years there, right? So, I mean, they could tell all sorts of stories for him in that time period. Let's see. Last story was a trailer this week. Don't know if you watched it. Don't know if you're even interested in it. But again, it was a shitty week for nerd news. So
if you don't think I'm interested in it, and I don't really watch trailers, you could almost bet that I didn't watch a trailer.
Well, I don't know what your thoughts are, but did you watch the Bohemian Rhapsody trailer?
I did not.
Are you interested in it?
I am.
Okay, good stuff. It looks like it's going to be good. I mean, who doesn't like Queen? And the music sounded great. Rami Malek, I believe is his name, is playing Freddie Mercury, and he looks the part sometimes. So other times he doesn't, but apparently he went to, University of Evansville. So that's a thing.
So I'm kind of hot and cold on this movie because I originally it was Sacha Baron Cohen who was supposed to play Freddie Mercury. I'm a big Queen fan, so I was pretty excited about that. And then when he dropped out, and I think this has had some problems as far as directors and writers and stuff like that, kind of dropping out, and they're having a hard time kind of finding people to do this movie. And so it was kind of one of those movies where I just didn't think it was ever going to happen. And then all of a sudden it looks like it is happening. And so, yeah, I meant to watch this trailer, honestly. Like, I know I just contradicted myself by saying if I'm not interested in it, I'm not going to watch it. But I am interested, and I still didn't watch it. But yeah, I'm definitely going to watch it eventually. And I'm kind of excited for this movie now that I know it's for sure happening.
Yeah, so obviously Bryan Singer got fired from this, so that's a whole thing with like the turmoil in this movie as well. But I was reading at one point that, you know, this was pretty much just a Freddie Mercury biopic, and then the surviving members of Queen got pissed off and they said that they wanted it to be about the whole band and focus on them too. And it's like, well, of course you do, but I mean, Queen is Freddie Mercury. I mean, I know
for sure.
They still travel around, and I think Adam Lambert sings with them now, but I mean, Queen was Freddie Mercury, so I think that's kind of silly that they're like, we want to be part of it too. So we'll see. We'll see what the movie looks like.
For sure.
That's all I have for nerd news.
All right. So we are back to reviewing movies again. We took a little bit of a break there. And this week, the big movie that was released, the one that we were really, really excited for, is Deadpool 2, as the title would suggest. Obviously, it's a sequel to the 2016 movie of the same name. It was directed by David Leitch. Is that how you pronounce his name? There's a T in there. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds good, man.
He actually co-directed John Wick, and then he solo-directed, I guess you would call it, Atomic Blonde. And, of course, there was a lot of turmoil with this movie as well. Tim Miller, who directed the first Deadpool, was originally set to direct this movie as well, but then he ended up leaving for, I guess what they always say is creative differences. It always seems like when people leave, except for when Bryan Singer leaves, it's because he's touching little boys. Allegedly.
Hugs and kisses.
Yeah. Now it's got to be the title. So this movie, obviously, like the first one, stars Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, who must bring together a team of misfits, mutants to save a misguided mutant teenager. So we both liked the first film. It felt like a breath of fresh air for the comic book superhero movie genre. I think it may even have cracked my 2016 top 10 when we did that episode with Matt Hurt from The Obsessive Viewer. Unfortunately, I've seen it a few more times since then, and it really doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't stand up to multiple viewings, but it definitely has that problem with comedy. It just has that diminishing returns, and there's so many jokes. There's so many jokes that you see it for the first time that don't land. And so obviously on multiple viewings, those jokes still don't land. And then the jokes that originally made you laugh don't really make you laugh that much. So it's just, it definitely does not stand up to multiple viewings. So I was pretty nervous going into this movie. Obviously I was excited because I liked the first one, love comic book movies, but I was pretty nervous because I was afraid that it was going to fall victim to a lot of the things that we talked about with comedy sequels, but also it's an action movie as well. So you have the fear that they're going to try to go over the top with it. It had the first movie had a relatively smaller budget compared to most comic book movies. So it was this huge hit. And a lot of times with these types of movies that have relatively small budget, when you get a sequel, they just balloon that budget and they go way over the top. So I was pretty nervous going into this movie.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about how much we agree on things on this podcast and just in life in general. And I think for me, it's the same thing with the first Deadpool. Like, it was the little movie that could, and there was something really special about that because obviously it was in developmental hell for a long time. It took some leaked footage for it to get made, and they didn't have much of a budget. Nobody believed in a rated R comic book movie. So it was fun to root for that, because obviously all of us wanted to see Ryan Reynolds play a real characterization of Deadpool. But like you said, you go back and you rewatch it. I think my problem is that it really slows down and drags out through the middle part of that movie. Like when he's going through the testing and he's kind of trapped in the facility that's exposing mutant genes and that kind of stuff. So that's where my issue with the first one lies. But, yeah, I mean, who wasn't excited for Deadpool 2? Like, there's some really funny one-liners in the trailers, and obviously, you know, they have more of a budget now. Things are promised to be bigger and better, but that doesn't always mean that it's going to be a fantastic movie. So I'm definitely excited to hear what you thought of it and to get my thoughts kind of out there as well. So.
All right. So if this is your first episode, we break down our reviews similar to how we break down the episodes. We have a lot of different segments, and we kind of just start off with a general overview. Of course, we are not going to spoil too much. We're going to try to stay away from spoilers. I think that this is, unlike Infinity War a few weeks ago, I think this is a movie that we can kind of go back to what we always do, is to kind of just stay away from spoilers. I don't think we necessarily need a spoiler section for this movie. So how'd you feel about Deadpool 2, broad strokes wise?
So overall, I was pretty disappointed with this movie. I think that it's a circumstance of just a little bit, at least, of the hype setting like a precedent for it, and it not living up to what I was expecting or what the reviews were saying. Like, this has an 84% or 83% on Rotten Tomatoes at this point. So obviously it's getting a lot of praise, and I just didn't think that it was that great. Like, it was fine, but I think most of my issues lie with the story. So I'll definitely get into it more into that segment. But, I will say, like, don't take this as me not liking the movie. I just think that it was much more average than what it's being given credit for, and I overall was pretty disappointed when I left the theater.
So I am super excited about this because I fucking love this movie and we never disagree on anything. So I'm pretty excited about this. I think, like I said, the first one cracked my top 10, but if I were to redo that, I don't think it would have made it, because honestly, like I said, the jokes don't really carry that much weight after a few viewings. And when you peel back the comedy from that movie, the actual story is not really that great. Like, the revenge story kind of works well in the first movie for the first couple of viewings. But then when you see it compared to this story, I just don't think that it's that important. And I felt like this story carried a little bit more weight, which was surprising because you don't normally see that with sequels. I just think that it felt more important. Of course, it's still a vehicle for comedy and action, but when there needs to be heart, I think that there's a lot more heart in this movie than the first one. And I just think because of that, it ultimately is a better film than the first one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't given much thought to like which one's better. And I actually said this to you as soon as I got to your house today. Like, I really want to see Deadpool 2 again because I think there's maybe some jokes I missed. Like, it's layered pretty heavy, but, it definitely sounds like we're going to disagree with the story. So I'm ready to get into that.
All right. So how'd you feel?
So you said that in the first one, you strip away the comedy and the story kind of sucks. That's how I feel about this movie. So this is, I think, where we're going to disagree the most. So my whole thing is that I feel like it was a vehicle for Ryan Reynolds to tell jokes. I think that this is an extremely average superhero story, but then it's wrapped in the fun little Deadpool package. So that's easily forgiven. So,
I feel like you just described the first movie.
Yeah, maybe we're talking about different movies here. I don't know. But yeah, like the main story of this movie is a guy comes back from the future to kill a kid that causes chaos later in life. The guy fights Deadpool. Then the guy and Deadpool come to an agreement and they kind of work together and then the day is saved. Like,
but you miss the most important part of this movie, which we obviously can't talk about because of the big spoiler.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what you're talking about, to be honest. I can kind of piece it together.
It's in the first 20 minutes of the goddamn movie.
Yeah. And I thought that what happens in the first 20 minutes of the movie was pretty cheap, to be honest. So I think that this movie is more routine than people are seeing. And I definitely expected more out of the story. Like Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick came back to write it. Ryan Reynolds is credited as a writer. Like, I feel like you have so much that you can build on from the first movie, especially with a character like Cable, because he's such a popular character and he's layered pretty well in the comic books, but they just don't live up to the potential there. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I love the package this movie comes in, as far as like the Deadpool stuff goes and the comedy goes. And there were definitely some like shock moments that were really hilarious. And, I'll kind of get into that more so when we talk about comedy and action, but at its core, I think the story is just a little too bland. The first movie was credited as being really fresh because it's a rated R superhero movie where it made a lot of money and it's really funny and this and that. And I expected more from this installment and it just didn't seem as groundbreaking.
I feel like you're just forgetting that first 20 minutes because I think, I read an interview with Ryan Reynolds talking about maybe making a third Deadpool movie. And he's basically like, the most important thing with this particular character is we constantly have to take things away from him. And that's kind of his driving force. And he's like, how many times can you take something away from him? And I think in the first movie, and I hate that I have to keep harping on it, but in the first movie, it's just like this simple revenge story. Like, yeah, he's essentially a burn victim now, and he's disfigured, and that's kind of what you're taking away from him in that first movie. And I just don't feel like that's that powerful of a connection. And I think in this movie, what you take away from him is more of a powerful connection. Like, you feel his dilemma, and you feel, kind of his driving force, why he wants to help this kid so much. I do have a couple of negatives. I'm not going to say that this is a perfect movie by any means. Cable, I will completely agree with you there. I thought that there was a lot of missed opportunities with that particular character. I don't think that he's very well developed, and maybe that's a budgetary reason. Like, you don't really get to see him in the future very often. It's just kind of him looking out at like from his like broken apartment or house or wherever he was. And I think that was definitely a missed opportunity. And maybe that's just because they thought it was going to slow down the story. Or again, this movie did have a bigger budget, but it definitely didn't have the huge budget that a lot of these superhero movies do. So, which obviously is smart because it's rated R, so you have a cap on how much you can make because of that with a superhero movie. So I get that, but even the character didn't feel very well developed, and it kind of felt like he was just an excuse to kind of keep Deadpool grounded, which I appreciate. But you also had the X-Force there too to keep him grounded. So I definitely think it's a character that needs to have that. He needs to kind of have a little bit more structure. And I always think that the Cable and Deadpool stuff is really fun in the comics because you always need a straight guy to your kind of Joker character. And so I appreciate that. And he is that eventually in this movie, in the third act of this movie. But you just don't have enough character development that I think, that the character definitely deserved. And I think we get this in every X-Men movie. The mutants are an abomination storyline. Like, you get that in every single X-Men movie. And I get that would be a huge part of their lives, and they would definitely be scrutinized constantly because of that. But it's just, as a movie, I don't care about it anymore. I've seen that so many times that I just don't care about it. The X-Force stuff, kind of getting back to more positive stuff, I thought that it was really handled well from start to finish. I thought that the interview kind of montage thing, where they were kind of picking their team, was really funny. I think just the way, like I said, from start to finish, it was just really well handled. There's a big spoiler that I'm obviously trying to sidestep there, but I thought the Domino stuff, and we'll get into the comedy and action here in a little bit, but I thought that her stuff was probably the best in the entire movie. And like I said, I think that there needs to be characters that kind of ground Deadpool. And I think with Cable and Domino and some other characters in this movie versus the first movie, you didn't really have a whole lot of that in the first movie. So he can kind of go wild in that first movie, and it kind of gets old really quickly. But I like the fact that in this movie, he had other people to kind of keep him grounded. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything, but did you notice in the movie, because I didn't see it, but I noticed in a article afterwards that points it out that Brad Pitt played the Vanisher?
Yeah, that was a big spoiler that you just ruined in the episode.
Oh, geez, it's not a spoiler.
Yeah, it is.
No, it's not. It was, well, comicbook.com is not a good resource, but I mean, they put it out there like day after it was released. Like,
yeah, that was the big cameo.
Oh, okay, well. Hey.
I mean, that wasn't the spoiler that I was trying to sidestep.
Yeah,
but I felt like that was a bigger. That was too. I wouldn't have said it.
Well, I would obviously, and I'm editing. I'm not cutting it out because I didn't notice it whenever I saw the movie.
I mean, it's like a half of a second.
Yeah, so a huge spoiler. Spoiled half a second of a movie.
Yeah, but I mean, I laughed. Like, it was cool that he was in there.
Did you notice him in the moment?
Yes, I did. Okay. That's why I laughed.
Okay. Yeah, because I didn't. So
Matt Damon was one of the hillbillies that Cable killed.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Ryan Reynolds did the voice of Juggernaut.
I didn't know that.
I read a lot of trivia about this movie.
I was curious who played Juggernaut, that's kind of a spoiler that he's in this movie.
Oh shit, yeah, you're right. Fuck.
All right, well, sorry guys.
Well, honestly, that was actually going to be one of my next points. That was so heavy-handed that was just. It was almost like Arkham Knight. Like, who else was it gonna be? Well,
and again, I hate to keep bringing up comicbook.com, but like 2 months ago when the last trailer came out, there's like a screen grab of somebody hitting a helmet. And they said the whole title was, "Is Juggernaut in Deadpool 2?" So the whole time that they're kind of building up to who's this crazy mutant that's working with this kid, it's like, well, it's going to be Juggernaut.
Yeah. I mean, you see it in the prison and it's just like, okay, that's who that is.
Yeah. So, I mean, I will say it's probably the best Juggernaut we've seen.
Well, I mean, yeah.
It's either him or Vinnie Jones, right? So.
Oh my God, Last Stand is so bad.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So performance-wise, again, we've talked about this all the time because we review a lot of sequels, but yeah, I mean, Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool is perfect casting, as always. Like, he was perfect in the first one. He obviously has a lot of passion for the character, so he works really well. Thought he did a good voice of the Juggernaut, even though we've already spoiled it at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, with the performances, I honestly don't have any complaints about people performing as their characters, and I think that you're right. Ryan Reynolds is like the perfect Deadpool, and he should thank his lucky stars that he's playing this character, because I think it's the only thing keeping his career afloat at this point, because he keeps making movies like The Hitman's Bodyguard and shit like that. So I know I said it in the story, but I do wish that Josh Brolin had more to do. He was seriously just brought on for this movie to play the serious military type for an entire movie, which seems like a waste to me. I think that his Thanos was more impressive than his Cable, and Thanos is completely CGI. So I was definitely bummed with that, but did anybody deliver a bad performance? I would say no.
Yeah, and I think that's more about the Josh Brolin stuff is more about the fact that they didn't give him a whole lot to work with more than his performance, because I think his performance was fine. But I just don't think that he was given too much work with. I will say that Zazie Beetz, I had to look up her name again because I couldn't remember. Like, I thought that was her name, and I was like, that's too ridiculous. Like, I must be misremembering. But yeah, that's her name. I thought she was amazing as Domino. But I think, again, that has a lot to do with it's kind of hard to distinguish between, is just her character's really fun and well written, or is it her performance? And I think a lot of it is just kind of a combination of the two.
Yeah, I thought she was fantastic. I would love to see a Domino movie with her. I was
sure.
I was really into that character.
All right, so let's go right into, I kind of combined comedy and action into one section. So I took the two and made it into one segment. So what do you feel about the comedy and the action in this movie?
So I mentioned in story, like obviously that's where my problem was with the bland story, in my opinion, but that it was wrapped in a fun package. And the fun package is the comedy and the action of this movie. I thought that the action was pretty great. I think that the scene on like the mutant convoy is probably my favorite. I thought that was great. But then, of course, the comedy, like I said, I need to go see this movie again because I feel like there are jokes I missed. I appreciate the joke density. I appreciate how much is layered in. I think that Ryan Reynolds is great at delivery of those jokes. And I really honestly feel like they didn't really pull any punches. Like, there's DC jokes, there's Marvel jokes. The mid-credit scene is a giant fuck you to 20th Century Fox and some of the X-Men movies and some other choices that some actors have made without spoiling anything. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like everything's up for grabs here, and I appreciate that they don't try to stay too safe with the comedy.
Yeah, I thought the comedy was great. I think that there wasn't as many jokes. Like, there's still a lot of jokes in this movie, but I feel like they hit better because of some of the stuff that I mentioned with the story. I thought obviously the story was a lot better than you did. So, when they did have all of these jokes and they kind of mixed it well with, some heart, I thought that it worked a lot better than, again, the first movie did. I will say, however, that right now I enjoy this movie because we just had the DC universe and we just had, Josh Brolin just played Thanos. And so he has a joke about that. I don't know if this movie is going to, I think that this movie is going to be dated really quickly just because it does have a lot of topical jokes. And I know that they can't really think about that while they're writing it. They just have to write a funny movie. But I definitely was thinking that while we were watching it. I was like, does that Thanos joke really hit 10 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point.
Yeah, so I thought that the action was really cool. I will say that it was a little scattered. It seemed like some of the story was just kind of an excuse to put him in a weird situation so he could have a really cool action scene or whatever. I thought that the first little montage was awesome. I thought that it was funny how they kind of played with music, like the Dolly Parton's 9 to 5 while he's just like viciously murdering all these people was pretty hilarious. And that was something that they did in the first movie. So I appreciate that they kind of brought it back. Was they play with the soundtrack a lot. They have like these weird songs while he's doing like these really just awful things. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And I think we're forgetting the biggest part when they go full Winnie the Pooh. I thought that was pretty funny. They do kind of sit in that scene a little bit too long for me, but it is still pretty funny. Yeah.
I mean, it was a good sequel to obviously that gag from the first movie. So
yeah, for sure. So, star rating, Deadpool 2. What'd you think?
So, like I said, I'd really like to see it again, and maybe in hindsight, I will rate this movie higher, but right now I'm going to give it a 3.5.
Okay. I was kind of going back and forth between 3.5 and 4, and like I think we always say, like upon multiple viewings, maybe we bump this down or higher, depending on how we feel about it after a few viewings, but I think that I'm going to give it a 4.
Okay. Are you sure about that? You didn't sound too...
I know. I always kind of harp back to this, but I kind of wish that we could give it quarter stars. Because I would go definitely three and 3/4 on this one for sure, but I'll go with 4. I'll round up.
At that point, why don't we just do it out of 10?
We can't go out of 10 now, at this point.
Let's just rate out of 3 stars, but do tenths of a point.
But now you're just being ridiculous.
All right, so 4 it is. We'll round up.
Yeah, for sure. So, what's nerd favorite this week?
So I saw earlier this week that it was trending on Twitter that people were kind of chiming in with the worst movie they ever paid to see. So I thought that that would be an interesting question to pose to you. The caveat that I'm going to put on this is that it can't be a MoviePass movie. So it can't be anything we use our MoviePass for, even though technically that is paying to see a movie, just to make it a little tougher, to choose which movie that you're going to pick here. Mine is Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. So that was like a perfect storm of shit. So obviously that movie is awful, but also the circumstances and the way I saw that movie were especially terrible. I was dating a girl at the time and we were visiting her family in Hazard, Kentucky. So we were at like the local movie theater that was a rundown piece of shit, like 2 screens, like barely holding together. So that was not fun. It was like probably the shittiest movie theater I've ever been to in my life. So that was terrible. And then obviously the movie is just shit-tastic. I mean, literally at one point you see a robot's would-be testicles. And that's like the one thing that I remember from that film. So it's bad from start to finish, especially after, what's somewhat liking the very first Transformers movie, like just a terrible, terrible follow-up to that. And like I said, the situation I was in as well didn't help. So yeah, for sure, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen.
I think it's funny that you keep saying shit when you were describing that movie, because the only thing I remember from that movie is that I had to leave for a little bit to take a shit. Yeah, I mean, that movie is definitely up there. And I talked about this a lot when we reviewed The Circle, is I honestly don't think that that's the worst movie I've ever seen. It's definitely up there, but it has some entertainment value. Like if you just completely shut your brain off and then this is kind of cool because they're robots fighting each other. That's kind of cool. So you can get some enjoyment out of it. But with movies like The Circle, where there's nothing happens, it's a terrible movie, it's super boring. Those are the movies that I hate the most. And of course I can't use that because I used my movie pass to pay for that movie. So I can't use that one, but I think I brought this up when we talked about this movie, is that it dethroned my least favorite movie of all time, the worst movie I've ever seen, is The Happening. I paid money. Not only did I pay money for me, I paid money for the girl I was dating as well. So I was doubly mad after I saw that movie, because that just, oh my God, there's nothing happens in that movie. It's so fucking boring. And what's even more funny about that, well, I guess funny is not necessarily the word, sad is probably the better word, but is it came out the same weekend. Maybe it didn't come out exactly the same weekend. I don't remember the situation, but I hadn't seen The Incredible Hulk yet. So my girlfriend and I were debating, like, which one are we going to see first? We saw them both that weekend. We both decided on The Happening first. And that makes me a little sad, even though I've rewatched all of the MCU movies in the last couple of weeks, and The Hulk is probably one of my least favorite of those movies. It's still far and away better than The Happening. So I don't like the fact that I spent money on that movie and I also saw it over The Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you guys picked that over The Incredible Hulk, even at that point. Like, I know you're a big horror fan, so it might have been intriguing to go see that, but still, like, a Hulk movie, that's a pretty big deal, so that's surprising.
Yeah, I hadn't quite given up on M. Night at that point, but that was, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That movie is just fucking awful.
Yeah, it's pretty awful for sure.
All right, so that's it for episode 190, We're closing in on 200. I can't wait. I don't know if we don't really plan that far ahead, so I don't know if we're going to do anything special for our 200th episode or not. But as always, we hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. You can also check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. Comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. You can also email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. And finally, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, guys.
Later, guys.